MC Christopher. Take it away.
Thanks, Jill. Good morning, everyone. So great to be with you again. And as Jill mentioned, we have some phenomenal speakers lined up for us today. And to kick us off, we will have Dorothy Hinton and Miss Kimberly Davis. Dorothy Hinton, some of you may already know. Dorothy has over 20 years of experience working in the field of education. She is a graduate of East Carolina University and currently serves as the Executive Director for Communities and Schools of the Rocky Mountain region. Dorothy originally joined CIS of the Rocky Mountain region in 2003 as a program coordinator. Other roles in the organization include Student Support Specialist, Director of Community Partnerships and Programs. Dorothy also served as a communications teacher, testing coordinator, and Director of Student Services with Rocky Mount Preparatory School. Prior to her career in the field of education, Dorothy worked in management for Sears, Roebuck and Company for several years. She also worked in accounting for 7 years, most notably with the Hardee's Food Systems. As you can see, she has a well-rounded background, which brings her to this space today. Dorothy is married to Alfonso, and they have 3 children, Brandon, Braxton, and Baja. Ms. Kimberly Davis is currently serving as Senior Executive Vice President, Social Impact, Growth Initiatives, and Legislative Affairs at the National Hockey League, aka NHL, the premier professional ice hockey league in the world. In this capacity, Kim leads a role reporting to NHL Commissioner Gary Bettman to attract, develop, and retain fans with specific focus on multicultural audiences through culture, youth participation, and social impact initiatives. Ms. Davis has been recognized as #1 on Sportsnet's list of 25 most powerful women in sports, as well as honored in Sports Illustrated's The Unrelenting Most Powerful Women in Sports. Hockey News 2020 topped 100 most influential leaders in the sport. Essence Magazine's Woke 2019 Change Agents, Adweek's 30 Most Powerful Women in Sports, and Sports Business Journal's Game Changers. She has received other notable recognitions, including Savoy Magazine's Top 100 Most Influential Blacks in Corporate America, and was showcased in Fast Company's 100 Most Creative People in Business. In 2012, she was profiled with none other than First Lady Michelle Obama in Essence Magazine's 28 Most Influential Black Women in America. Ladies and gentlemen, if you would, put your hands together for a warm welcome to 2 of the most phenomenal women that I know. Without further ado, for our fireside chat, Dorothy Hinton and Kimberly Davis.
Thank you so much, Chris. You are so kind. I appreciate it. I appreciate it. And Ms. Davis, it is an honor for me to interview you this morning. And I just want to start off with something a little bit fun to say this is considered our fireside chat for our Impact Conference. In this case, it's our morning fireside chat. So if we were in person, what would be your beverage of choice?
Well, I'm actually drinking lemon water this morning.
Okay.
I typically start my day with lemon water. Not so exciting, but very good for the soul.
Absolutely. And we'll make note of that for future opportunities so that when we do get back in person and we get this opportunity again, that we can have some lemon water ready for you. So I'm going to jump right in. We have about an hour of time together, and we'll have some Q&A from the audience as well. But I want to start with an article that I recently read and Chris referenced in Sports Illustrated magazine, where you were highlighted. And it was in a series called Elle Elite, and you were recognized as one of 100 most influential Black women in sports. And so this is a collaboration, I believe, with Sports Illustrated and Empower Onyx. So congratulations to you on that recognition. But in the article, you talk about someone who is a great influencer in your life. So could you share a little bit about who that person is, what they mean to you, and the knowledge the person shared with you that continues to guide you through your everyday work?
Sure. Thank you, Dorothy, and thanks to all of you this morning for having me. I'm honored to be with you today. Yes, one major influencer in my life was my grandmother, Dr. Rose Butler Brown, and it is apropos that we are talking about her and that side of my family because my grandfather actually came from North Carolina and was a minister outside of Raleigh. Dr. Rose Butler Brown was the first Black woman to get her PhD from Harvard in 1939. And she often shared the story of being one of only 2 women in her PhD program, and the fact that no one would study with her. And many of you will know that really the essence of a PhD program is research and collaboration. And so she had to go through that experience without the benefit of that. Nonetheless, she graduated second in that program and went on as a child psychologist to teach in rural North Carolina, ultimately teaching at the University of Rhode Island, which is where her family was from. And today there is a dormitory on that campus that holds her name. She was clearly a fearless woman. You can imagine back in that time what it took to withstand the kind of experiences that she went through. But she always said that fear is something that is ever present and ever constant. And notwithstanding fear, you have to go beyond fear. You have to buckle yourself up, she used to say, and move beyond your fear, understanding that it is going to be there. And so the notion of being fearless is not to say that you are without fear. It is to say that in spite of fear, you persevere. And that is something that I have held close to my heart and my actions throughout my 40 years in corporate America, for sure, and throughout my life.
That's great. Those are great words of wisdom that certainly I can lean into that as well and utilize that, if I may, when I'm in those spaces where that fear may tend to rise up a little bit, that I can relate back to these words that you've shared this morning. So I appreciate you sharing that with us. I want to move forward a little bit. So for over 20 years, you've worked as a member of the executive committee with H.P. Morgan Chase Foundation, and you served as the foundation's president. As a former managing director of the global corporate social responsibility sector, how did you find your voice to lead a team which was not as diverse as we think?
Well, actually, my leading the foundation in global philanthropy at JP Morgan was close to the end of my time at JP Morgan. I retired in 2012 from JP Morgan after 21 years there. And the last 7 years of my time there, I spent as head of philanthropy and global corporate responsibility. But my career actually started, obviously, 20 years before that in that space, working for a small bank that Chase acquired in 1991. And I mention that because my career at JP Morgan and all of its successor banks was one of constant pivoting, constant change. I was with JP Morgan during a time when banks were going through significant merger and acquisition and consolidation. And so while I worked there for over 20 years, I went through 9 mergers and acquisitions during that time. And every time an organization either acquires another one or is merged with one, it's like starting over. You literally are resetting. You're resetting the organizational structure. You're resetting the power dynamics. You're resetting those people that have been your sponsors and mentors. Sometimes they change positions. They no longer have the power and influence that they had. Sometimes they leave the organization. And so what that experience over that period of time taught me was how to operate within ambiguity and within the realm of change, and to be comfortable with change. One thing we can count on, right, is that change is ever present. And I think that it has bode well for me as I have moved into other industries, particularly going from financial services to consulting and now to sport. In a sport where I didn't have any background, I never played hockey. And so it gives you a level of confidence and courage to be able to know that based on your experience and based on the competencies that you have, that you can thrive in any organization. I think that was the lesson learned in going through that period of time and that period of change in those various roles.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing that. Want to ask one more item from the article right now, because you spoke in the article about how business environments can sometimes seem intimidating, particularly for women of color. And so what are your insights on how women of color can navigate through those business spaces to be more comfortable in that space?
Yeah. It's an important question. And let me start by first saying that I think for women generally, being in spaces where we have not historically been, one, in places and spaces where our voices may not have been valued, can be daunting. But for women of color, that triple threat, I call it, that intersection of race, ethnicity, and gender presents some even deeper challenges. There are what my son, who is an anthropologist, refers to as flashcards that people have for different groups. And those flashcards are typically formed as a result of experiences, biases, the way we grow up, all kinds of things, both internal and external environmental factors. And so for women of color, the flashcard of what it means to be racialized, what it means to represent a certain ethnicity, what it might mean to represent a different sexual orientation, all of those intersections can present some challenges. And so it goes back to those words that my grandmother shared, and that is this notion of fearlessness. And the first step, in my opinion, of being fearless is not questioning your own value. And I think often when we are in these spaces where we are the only ones, or we are, our competence has been questioned, it's very easy for us to lose our confidence and for our energy and for our enthusiasm to fade. And when that happens, you lose everything, right? Once you lose that will, then your skill starts to erode. And so it is important for women of color to understand, and for women generally to understand, that we deserve to be in these spaces. We've earned our right to be in these spaces. Our voices bring a perspective that is valuable and differentiating in these spaces, and to sort of quell that voice in our heads that says, I'm not good enough. I don't have a right to be here. And to use our power to move forward, because there are a lot of other people watching us, and not just other women, but also men as well.
Yes. Great insight. Thank you so much for sharing that as well. I tell you, I am building my toolbox just from these first couple of questions that I've asked you this morning. And so I am, building my toolbox and adding some resources that are going to truly help me in the space where I am currently. So I thank you. You've also worked with Billie Jean King to build a leadership initiative and to advance gender diversity and pay equity. Okay. And so can you share some of your conversations with Billie Jean King around pay disparities between men and women, also, Blacks and whites?
Yeah, yeah. So Billie, as you all know, is just amazing and of course iconic. And I had the great honor to help her build her leadership center, the Billie Jean King Leadership Initiative, which is the only effort that Billie has ever undertaken that has held her name. And that was very important to her. 40 years ago, Billie founded the Women's Sports Foundation. And in fact, they had their big gala last night. And that was in the wake of Title IX and her wanting to ensure that there was a place that focused on girls and women in sport. But the leadership initiative was really about how Billie can use her power to influence CEOs and other leaders around two pillars that she's very, very passionate about, as you mentioned. And those pillars are pay equity for women and board and public board seats for women. In both cases, women are woefully underrepresented relative to demographics and how those demographics are growing. So for example, on the pay equity side, white women, for every dollar that a white man makes about 80 cents on the dollar. For women of color, those numbers are even more startling. For Black women, that number drops from 80 cents to 57 cents. For Latina women, that number is 54 cents. And for Asian women, that number is around 59 cents. Sadly, that number does not even exist for Indigenous Native women because the numbers are so minuscule. And so when you see, again, you can look at that and just imagine what I talked about in terms of that triple threat, that intersection of gender, race, and ethnicity, and see how it plays out in real live data. From a board perspective, again, we see the same kinds of trends. White women represent about 17% of corporate board seats on Fortune 500 companies. For women of color, that number drops precipitously to about 4%. And so Billie's mandate and her vision for the center was to be a place where people could learn how to access the data, to understand the issues, where they could lead their organizations through education on how to move the dial on these issues, and where they could develop strategies that could actually change the way their organizations are constructed through metrics and measurement. And this institute has been in place for 5 years now, and she's had some marvelous results. And if you're interested in learning more, you can go to bjkli.com and see what work that the Institute has done. Very, very, very impressive.
Okay, great. In your current role as the Vice President of the National Hockey League, Senior Vice President, can you share with our audience today what your major responsibilities include?
Sure. So I have responsibility for sort of 5 key pillars within a department that we call Social Impact, Growth, and Legislative Affairs. The first pillar is around youth programming. So how do we use giving kids access to hockey, whether it be on ice or off ice in the form of street hockey and other innovations, so that they can become engaged in their communities, they can become healthier, and ultimately their families can become fans of the sport. So we see youth engagement and youth participation as an important pathway to fan development. So that's one sphere. The second area I'm responsible for is community development and impact. How do we build relationships and partnerships with organizations, organizations that are serving children and are helping to build stronger, more vibrant communities so that we can support them and we can partner with them to continue to strengthen our communities. I have responsibility under that pillar for the NHL Foundation, as well as all of our campaigns that we do across North America. The third pillar is sustainability and environmental impact. A sport like hockey, as you would imagine, utilizes a tremendous amount of water and natural resources. And so how are we good stewards of that? How do we lead and provide thought leadership around environmental sustainability, particularly as we think about it through the lens of social justice, and continue to use our resources and our voice in that space. The fourth area is what I call culture consulting, and that is where I work with the CEOs and the owners of our 32 clubs across North America to help build their capabilities and to build their muscles, as I often say, to understand how demographics are shifting in their markets, to think about these demographic shifts, not through the lens of charity, but through the lens of growth. And that's a major shift in mindset and behavior, and to help move the league forward in terms of how we are developing future talent, both on and off the ice. And then the fifth dimension that I have responsibility for is innovation. What are the ways in which we are innovating on the ice with youth programming, with the ways in which we can lead this sport forward and make it the real standard bearer for inclusion in the sports world. So a tall order, a big mandate, but really exciting time to be in a sport like hockey.
Absolutely. And I can remember meeting you in Chicago at Town Hall. That was my first opportunity to meet with you. That was a few years ago. And we talked about, you know, the National Hockey League and this new venture that you were headed into and the speed at which you wanted to go, you know, how much you wanted to push those types of things. And I asked you specifically because, you know, we're from North Carolina here, everyone here in this audience, and I asked you about your plan to how you would engage the Carolina Hurricanes. And I think tonight, absolutely, I think is their first game of the season. So anyway, this is a great time to bring in talk about the Hurricanes a little bit, but can you share with us kind of the updates and the progress in building relationships with the leaders of the Carolina Hurricanes?
Yeah. So a little over 2 years ago, the Hurricanes, the ownership changed, and a gentleman by the name of Tom Dundon became the sole owner of the Hurricanes. And over the past 2.5 years, he has really done a lot to rebuild that team, to rebuild both on the ice as well as in the front office. And so he and I have had a lot of conversations about what that needs to look like as it relates to attracting talent that has not historically been part of the Canes organization. As a result of our relationship, he hired actually the first ever general counsel, Black general counsel in any of our clubs. And that has made a big difference in terms of their enlightenment and their understanding of how to attract new audiences, but particularly to build trust-based relationships with the Black and Brown community in Carolina. I would say that it's a journey. It's not an event. And this is what I say to all of our clubs, that educating, inspiring, making connections, demonstrating leadership means that you have to be intentional about it every single day. And I firmly believe that representation counts. it is very hard to attract new audiences, particularly audiences of color, to a sport like hockey, if they don't believe that it's a safe place, that it is a welcoming place, and that is demonstrated by who they see, both in the stadium and in the front office. And so every club has improvement to do there, including the league. But I am encouraged. Now it will be 4 years that I'm with the NHL. I am encouraged by the direction that we're going in and the trends that we're seeing. For the first time ever, we have more players of color on the roster than we've seen in the history of the league. 55 players of color will start this season. And again, that number has grown exponentially over the past 5 years. And what's encouraging about that is that there's an amazing pipeline of talent coming up in minor hockey and in youth hockey of kids of color that are playing at the elite levels, which means that there's a feeder for future professional players. But more importantly than being a player, because we know in sports, the chance of actually playing professionally is very, very small. But the exposure of a sport like hockey to kids of color, knowing that there are opportunities for them to be lawyers and opportunities for them to be in positions like mine and opportunities for them to be in sales. People don't think about, the number of people that a league employs and those opportunities for people to build their careers in a sport like hockey and other sports. So that's really part of what I think my remit is to make kids and families feel like hockey is a sport for them, that it's a safe and welcoming environment. And we have work to do, but we are making progress.
And so what are some of those initiatives that the National Hockey League supports to build that culture, to build that pipeline? Are there some ways that the National Hockey League is supporting communities that are under-indexed or underexposed?
Yeah. So on a national level, we have forged a partnership with Boys and Girls Club nationally and have used that as a basis for encouraging our 32 clubs. And even in Canada, there are 6 clubs in Canada. There are comparable organizations to the Boys and Girls Club that are Canadian based to build those relationships with the affiliates in their markets. And we're doing it through two national programs. One is a street hockey program where we know for a lot of our communities, they just don't have access to ice. So infrastructure is a problem, but also cost is a problem. And as much as both infrastructure and cost are a problem in hockey, really cost has become a problem in almost every sport as youth sports has become privatized. And so if a kid starts playing a travel sport, it's very, very expensive. Mm-hmm. So we've developed this partnership with Boys and Girls Club and put an $80 million fund in place called the Industry Growth Fund, where we are subsidizing and in many cases eliminating the cost of entry, both equipment, fees, and access to ice for kids to be able to learn to play hockey through our Learn to Play programs, our Learn to Skate programs, and just giving kids the exposure. And those kids that show an interest after that 8-week program and they want to go on to the next level, that we are creating those pathways so that they, again, aren't held back from advancing in hockey due to cost. We're also, as I mentioned, doing the street program with Boys and Girls Hockey, where we're providing equipment for kids to see street hockey is not just, playing with sticks and a ball, but actually creating its own pathway, its own on-ramp for street hockey for kids to get exposed and to make it cool and to make it hip for kids, particularly in areas where there is no access to ice. And so those programs are really, really promising. Over the past 10 years, we've exposed over 150,000 kids across North America to Learn to Play programs and the ball and street hockey programs. The key now is how do you keep those kids engaged? How do you make sure that there are programs, connecting programs to those that will continue to engage them? There's a lot that's going on in hockey, but what I learned when I joined was that hockey is a very humble sport, doesn't talk about the stuff that it does. And so that has really, I think, in many ways hurt the sport of hockey, particularly in communities of color, because there's a history of Blacks in the sport of hockey dating back to the late 1800s. The Colored Hockey League actually freed slaves that migrated to Nova Scotia, primarily from the Carolinas. And many of the innovations of the National Hockey League came from that Colored Hockey League. And that's a history that had not been told. So there's that work that needs to be done. Again, we know in our communities, when we see it, representation counts, when we hear the stories, when there is connection and aspiration and relationships, there is then this expression of wanting to be part of it. And to be told that hockey is a white man's sport is just not true.
And so are there opportunities to make connections with middle school and high school athletic associations across the country, as well as at the collegiate level to promote more inclusivity with regards to hockey from the National Hockey League's perspective?
Yeah, we do a lot of work with NCAA, and in fact, an interesting statistic that I think you'd be, again, probably shocked at. There are about 13 women of color who are captains of Div 1 or Div 3 hockey programs across the United States. And we did a profile on those women about 4 months ago. Just amazing girls that have grown up in the sport of hockey and have gone on to play at the collegiate level. So the thing about hockey is that it's not a sport that you would typically pick up at the high school level. It's a sport because you have to learn to skate. You typically are exposing kids to hockey literally at the age of 3 or 4 and putting them on skates and getting them comfortable on skates. So it's a sport where, you know, it's not just a stick handling. You have to know how to ice skate and be proficient at ice skating. So our work is really about getting kids early, getting them on the ice, teaching them how to skate, and then following them and being able to stay connected to them. Now, there aren't many states that actually have hockey programs at the high school level. So that puts many of our kids at a disadvantage because they aren't able to play in public schools. Most hockey teams, the best hockey teams, are in elite private schools. So that's why we're putting money into privatized programs that have started up, but typically don't have the funds to continue to support kids. We're putting our money into those kinds of programs so that we can shore them up as they've identified talent and help them take that talent to the next levels.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you for sharing that. I guess we can hope that, you know, through the efforts of you supporting the Hockey League supporting the privatized programs, that we will get to that space where we can build more, expand more across the, you know, to build that skill set of young people so that we can expand programming more in our high schools. And that's going to take a work of a village, not just the National Hockey League, but exactly. Right, more folks that are also willing to buy into that and support it. So thank you for sharing that. So you've gained respect in the business world by being direct, you're trustworthy, and you are authentic. And so I want you to talk a little bit more of how you have integrated strategies into the National Hockey League, which is primarily has been a white male dominated space, but how you have integrated some strategies to build a culture of inclusivity and representing the under-indexed audience.
That's a mouthful, isn't it?
It is, but we've got a little bit of time left. So
all right, well, I would say that it starts with calling it and naming it, right? I said to the commissioner when I joined the league that if we are going to build trust with communities that have otherwise not felt like hockey was for them, we have to be honest about where we are. And we can't continue to not want to say that we have been perceived, and it's more than perception, because the perception rolls into reality when you look at the makeup of the league in terms of its workforce demographics, in terms of the players on the ice. All of these things point to the fact that it has not been a sport that appears to be welcoming to others. And the way you do that is to be transparent and to be vulnerable. And so just talking about the fact that we are interested and focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion is step one, right? Saying it out loud. We not hiding, not saying I'm working on it, I'm tinkering with it behind the scenes, but to say out loud, this is a focus, this is an area that we are passionate about, that we see as the future of our growth. And this is an area that we are going to be putting investment dollars behind. And that is critically important. Talking is fine, but if you don't put your money where your mouth is, then you aren't going to make any change. And so the second part of that is putting investment dollars into the work. We started the journey 3 years ago by inviting voices from the community, former players, those that play the sport of hockey currently at the youth level, their parents, marketing experts, all kinds of people that are in the ecosystem of hockey. We invited them to be part of 3 committees, a player committee, a fan committee, and a youth hockey committee. And we said that we are going to be quiet and we're going to listen. We need you to tell us what will make hockey more accessible and how we can make the sport more engaging in your community. And those committees came back with 16 very distinct recommendations that we are now putting investment dollars behind and moving forward. And it was hard. It was hard for people in positions of power who had long been part of a system that was very exclusive to hear that kind of feedback, but it was the beginning of a journey. And it became a movement, as I often say, took a moment and it turned into a movement. And I think we are now poised for the game to change over time, because now we put structure in place. So if I leave the hockey league tomorrow, all of this passion and these ideas don't leave with me. We've put structures in place now that can sustain themselves over time. Did we lose her, Christopher?
Yeah, technology. She'll be back momentarily. I do have a follow-up. I'm sorry, go ahead, Allison.
No, I was going to say that actually Dorothy lost power.
Oh.
So I don't know when she'll be back, but Christopher, keep on going. You've got this. Miss Davis, you keep on going.
Cool.
All right.
So Kim, I love what you just shared, right? So when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, I also like to throw that, talk about the access part of that. And you mentioned how difficult it was for those that have been practicing life a certain way. Can you tell us a little bit about how what that transition entailed to get people to buy in?
Yeah, that's a super great question, because I love your term practicing life. And the reason I love it is because it demonstrates, I think, in just how the words feel, that this is not some kind of, pernicious system of hate that is flowing through our systems. That's not to say that there aren't pernicious systems of hate that exist, but for the most part, people are wanting to do right and to do good. They just don't know how to do it. Okay. And I think if you start from the place of understanding that everyone has to have a level set understanding of what we are all trying to achieve, so that our definition of how we move forward and our assessment of progress is consistent. And that's what we did at the league. So I identified through best practices and years of doing this work, what I call 7 dimensions of excellence and inclusive leadership. And notice I didn't say dimensions of excellence in diversity, equity, and inclusion. I said inclusive leadership, because we have to get to the point where we understand that inclusion equates leadership. This is about leadership. The work that we're talking about in terms of engaging audiences, engaging communities, engaging families, engaging kids, is about making our communities stronger and vibrant and healthier. And everybody wins when that happens. Companies win because they have a stronger, more vibrant, more educated workforce. School systems win because kids are healthy and they're happy and they're mentally whole, and their families are the same. So this is an ecosystem that we're trying to create that has economic, social, physical, it hits all of the levers. And when you start looking at it through that lens versus thinking that we are, quote, helping someone, it shifts your mindset, I think, about how you do it and why this matters to you most. So that's what we did. These 7 dimensions: leadership, education, employment, marketing, partnerships, youth participation, and community and civic engagement. We identified those 7 dimensions of inclusive leadership. And then we defined each one of those with those committees that we formed. And we then said, how does this then play out for you in your particular market, right? Because markets are different, communities are different. And so it needs to be highly customized. It's what I call a global model. It's sort of a global strategy with local execution. So the model is very global and bespoke to the particular market and the conditions. And it doesn't mean that everybody is going to be pulling each one of those levers at the same time in the same way, but it provides a guiding light to know how we need to proceed in order to really affect change. And then you can establish metrics around each one of those dimensions. I'm about to lose my power, so let me get my cord while we're talking.
Thank you so much for that. And I apologize. We had a power surge and we lost internet connection and all of that. And so Chris, bring me back up to speed. That we were getting ready to get into answering the question. That was the loaded question. And I don't know if we moved on past it or not, but Ms. Davis, I'm going to have to catch up with you one-on-one to get to get your answer to the question that I began. Is that where we were still?
Yeah, Chris handled it very well.
I'm sure he did. I'm sure he did. I wanted to also ask you a couple of other things. When we look at our affiliates and our state office in North Carolina, CISNC, and all of our affiliates and the work that we're doing around diversity, equity, and inclusion, building practices and standards, we are in different spaces. And this may have been a part of what you've already answered. I apologize. And we're not all in the same space. But what can you share with our team that are on this, a part of this meeting today, our state office team, our executive directors, program directors, support specialists, board members, that what can you share with us so that we can see our mission? And I think you mentioned it a little bit, not through a lens of charity, but through growth, which you've talked about.
Yeah, and that's really a continuation of what Chris had raised and what we were talking about. This idea that whether we're talking about educational change, supporting families, civic engagement, political process. Ultimately, we're talking about community ecosystems that have a lot of different elements that ultimately lead to stronger, more vibrant communities. And at the end of the day, whether you are a unit of one, the family and the child, or a corporate entity, everybody wins when we have stronger, more vibrant communities. And I think if you start from that place, it helps you begin to see what your imperative is as an organization. That would be the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is it's really important to look at the data. Now, one of the first things I did when I joined the National Hockey League was I called an old friend of mine, Dr. Bill Fry, who's the senior demographer at the Brookings Institute. And Bill has been doing longitudinal data capture around demographic shifts in North America for over 20 years. And I asked Bill if he and I could co-author a piece to take his data and to look at the trends that he's seen around demographics through the lens of hockey. And he and I worked on that piece, and we then published a piece that we sent to all of our owners and our clubs that said demographic shifts and the implications on hockey. And we wrote a narrative around the data. And one of the most, I think, stunning pieces of data and a real wake-up call for our clubs was this one fact, that at that time when we had 31 clubs, now we have 32 because Seattle Kraken have come online, but 31 at that time, and this was in August of 2019 when this piece was published, 23 of our 31 clubs were already today in markets where this notion of minority was a misnomer for both millennial and Generation Z populations in those states. They were in the majority already. So the pipeline that was going to be required and how they were going to have to engage those families and those audiences was going to be a whole new game for those clubs. That was stunning. So the data counts. It matters to understand the data. How are your demographics shifting? What are the implications? What does it mean in terms of the new ways in which you have to market, the way you have to hire, the way you have to upskill? Those are all the things, the strategic questions that your board and your leadership need to be asking and answering, in my opinion.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Because you do serve on our CIS national board as well. And so when you look at the Communities in Schools network, what would you say our strengths are? And then where are some of the challenges or the areas of improvement for CIS as an organization when we look to build an inclusive leadership?
Well, I think our strengths are just the amazing way, the way we integrate ourselves. Excuse me for just one. The trust that CIS has built in so many communities with families and with partnering organizations to create these wraparound services around families, understanding that we're talking about the whole child and the whole family, and there's not one thing, but there are many levers that have to be pulled. I think that is unique to CIS. I think the fact that we do it through the lens of data. Again, you heard me say data counts. I think there's no organization that does it as well as CIS does in terms of data. If there's an area that we probably need to continue to strengthen is our understanding and our patience around the empathy that is required to really change people's experiences and their behaviors. And it's bigger than just the one experience or the small experience that we might be having with them. There's so many other factors that go into how people show up and how they feel. And so all of this, I even talk about it at the league level. And I talked about it when I was in corporate America the same way, that the kind of change that we're all trying to affect is not something that is going to happen with, a 2-hour educational or training session. We're talking about behavioral change, which means mindset shift, which means undoing some of what has been done to all of us at some point. And at some point we have to say, here's where we are today. It doesn't really matter what I thought or what I believed before. How am I going to do better and be better going forward? That's our responsibility as leaders. That's our responsibility as inclusive leaders, to suspend whatever has been and to step into the future of what has to become. And that's the work that I think we all have to do. And I think that's when we're really going to start making change in people's lives and experiences and change in our communities.
Great, thank you so much for that. And Chris, I see we're at about 9:30. How much time do we have left in this session? Are we at the point where we're ready for some questions from the audience?
So we have, let's say, another three or so minutes, and then we can open the floor for questions. If you have questions for Kim Davis or Dorothy Hinton, please, again, feel free to enter those into the Q&A section, and I'll get to those shortly.
And when we spoke, Ms. Davis, you talked about how the work is aligned, right? The work of the National Hockey League that you graciously have embraced, and also the work with communities and schools are aligned when it comes to, building changing the behavioral, the mindset, and shifting into a more inclusive arena. Share your thoughts about how it's aligned.
Yeah. I think those 7 dimensions of inclusive leadership that I outlined could be applied in any industry, in any environment, right? They are not unique to sport. They aren't unique to the National Hockey League. Again, how they play out and how they are defined within your organization will differ. But I think those are 7 dimensions that are very applicable to a change model across many industries and organizations. The thing we have to understand, and I want to just make sure I am clear about this, is that everybody is not going to come along on this journey, on this movement at the same time in the same way. And there's some people that are just not going to ever come along, right?
That's right.
So let me hold that here for a moment. And then let me also say that at the same time, people are going to be motivated to participate by different things. Some people are going to be motivated through the data, through their heads. Others are going to be motivated through their hearts. Others are going to be motivated by the risk and the threat that it has to your enterprise or your business. Some will be motivated by the experience that they are having in their own lives, right? So you have to meet people where they are, and you can't try to force people to all go at it the same way and be discouraged or disappointed when people don't do it the way you want it done. That's why a model is important, because a model, a framework, allows you to continue to keep moving, and despite where people are in the process, and they can play catch up as they choose or never catch up. There are, for example, in the National Hockey League, I would tell you that there are clubs and owners that might not ever get it, might not ever want to get it, may not see, no matter how I position the data and the and the shifts and the missed opportunity and the money that's being left on the table, doing the right thing, the risk to them in terms of the brand perception. Just don't care, don't see it, don't want it. You got to keep moving, right? I often say you run with the horses that are ready to run. And what happens is often you then see a group of organizations, group of people that were waiting to see who was going to do it. And so then they'll start coming along. Others want to do it, but they really don't know how to do it. And so once they have a model that they can follow, they then can become part of it. And so others are going to see people and organizations that they admire moving forward or that they compete with. You know, competition is a great motivator. And then they become part of it. So all of those are the tools in your toolkit as you are developing this vision and this movement that we talk about in the NHL and we talk about in CIS, this movement that has a guiding light and a North Star, and that is really changing the trajectory for kids in CIS for sure, and really creating stronger, more vibrant communities for all of us.
Absolutely. Amen, amen, amen. This has been, for me, just an amazing opportunity, as I mentioned early on, to add some tools to my own leadership toolbox from just such a powerful individual in you, Ms. Davis. And I appreciate having this time to chat with you this morning. I am going to turn it over to Chris. I think that unless Ms. Davis has some final words for us, I don't know if there are questions in the chat, but this has just been amazing for me. I truly, truly appreciate you.
Thank you, Dorothy. I appreciate it.
Indeed. We do have a couple of questions that came through. The first question, you mentioned earlier some of the programming that the NHL is doing, particularly around youth in local communities. Are there efforts being pursued to ensure students have access to hockey or knowledge of hockey while they are in school, or is it only outside?
Yeah. So I failed to mention a program that we have had underway for the past 5 years called Future Goals. And it is in public schools, primarily focused on schools that are in low income communities. And it uses hockey to teach STEM. And it is at the middle school level, so it's 6th through 8th grade. And it uses the concepts of hockey as a whole curriculum that was developed by EverFi in partnership with the National Hockey League. And we've put over $30 million in this program, both in the development, the creation of it, and the execution of it to use hockey concepts to teach STEM. What's great about it is that it gives that initial exposure of hockey to kids, and it teaches STEM primarily in schools that don't have the resources to have a STEM curriculum. And then we use it to invite the kids in those classes and their families to their first hockey game. And so that's one of the ways in which we expose them to the sport of hockey now that they've had some exposure to the concepts of hockey. And many clubs, for example, St. Louis, as an example, the Blues, when they invite the families and the kids, they invite them an hour and a half before the game for dinner. And then they teach them some of the basic concepts of hockey. You know, what's the blue line? So when they go into the stadium, they don't feel completely overwhelmed with, you know, the ice and the state of play. So it's a really outstanding program. We're looking to expand it and scale it. We're adding some dimensions to it now. We have a virtual science fair that we'll be doing in partnership with SAP in February of 2022. So that is a really, really outstanding program that you'll continue to hear more about.
Fantastic. And again, we appreciate you sharing. And you mentioned the diversity, equity, inclusion several times in your talk with us today, and the efforts that you are putting forth in the team leads. What does it look like for the players to get involved in making the sport more diverse?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the subcommittees that we had was made up of both current and former players, primarily players of color, advising us on the ways in which we can make the sport more accepting and to grow the sport. And they came back with 3 distinct recommendations. The first is player-led education in the locker rooms. We are now building a whole curriculum in partnership with retired players who are going to be delivering this training, where they are using DEI as a way to talk about building high-performing teams. They all believe that had inclusion and equity and diversity been talked about early in their careers in the locker room and understood as a strength and understood as a way to build team cohesion, then they would have felt more comfortable and the team would have been higher performing. And so that's a powerful notion. We've tested the model already at a combine this summer with the officials, and it was very, very powerful. We had both male and professional female players that were part of delivering the content. It was outstanding. The second area was around development post-career. There's so many players of color that retire and that don't have the opportunity to work in the NHL the way many of the white players do, going on to either be general managers or work in hockey operations or the many departments and fields that exist. And so they want a direct mentoring program that allows them to have access to those kinds of jobs, both in hockey operations, as well as broadcasters on television, those kinds of things. So that's being developed. And then the third area is how do you use the players to inspire the youth hockey kids so that, again, representation counts? How do you build a coalition of retired players that can run youth programs in communities and help bring up the next generation of ice hockey players of color?
Fantastic. And a couple of other questions for you. So your career has been quite vast. And to use the language that's in the chat right now, not to give anything away, but what's next for you?
Oh my goodness, retirement.
That's right.
I can't say when that'll be, but it will definitely be sooner than it will be later.
Hey, like my people say, what's next for me is the big sit down.
Oh God, my husband is already retired. We celebrate our 37th anniversary next Wednesday. So he's if it was up to him, I would have retired already, but I got a lot more in me.
I love it. And one final question before we head out. What is something that sparks joy for you in your life?
My 13-month-old grandson. I often say that the blessing of COVID was the birth of my first and only so far grandson, Liam. My daughter had him in August of 2020, and the blessing, because had it been normal times, I would have been on the road, and because we were in COVID and they live very close, I had a chance to work at their house every single day and spend every single day for a year, being able to, touch and pinch him. And I will never, you can't get time back, they say, but that was an amazing experience that I will forever be grateful for. That brings me joy.
That is awesome. And thank you so much for sharing that, also sharing your light, your expertise, your wisdom, and your heart with us today. And I feel confident in saying that your time this morning has sparked joy for a number of people on this call. So again, thank you. It's an honor to share space with you as well. Dorothy, You know, I'm a huge fan of you too. So thank you both for being the phenomenal humans that you are and being the examples. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, guys. I really appreciate you having